Hello and welcome to the February 2018 episode of Lunch with a Lawyer. I'm Steve Richardson, and we're here on February 8th, 2018, a few days after the big Eagles win of the Super Bowl. And we're here to talk about a ticket that's often issued in New Jersey called, it's for driving while suspended, driving on a suspended driver's license. And it's a common ticket. I get a lot of calls about it. And in a significant majority of those cases, it's fixable. It's a serious ticket, but usually the penalties that go with driving while suspended can be avoided simply by taking the steps that I'm going to talk about here. So if you've received a ticket like this, or you know someone that has, or at some point in the future you hear about it, have them check out this video. A lot of good information. So, what is driving while suspended? Well, obviously that. You're driving and your license is suspended. Now, for our purposes today, we're going to be talking about New Jersey licenses. And because I don't know what the procedures are in other states for other DMV agencies, what their procedures are, how things are handled in other states. So just be aware that we're talking in general about a driving while suspended ticket in New Jersey with a New Jersey licensed driver. And while we're on the topic, just to be clear, these videos that I do are informational to impart some knowledge to you that hopefully will be useful. They are not legal advice because, as I'm sure you understand, every case is different, and you should have an attorney. You should consult with an attorney on a ticket like this for your particular circumstance. So, the penalties for driving while suspended, if convicted, if you are indeed suspended during an active suspension, get more and more serious depending on how many times you've been convicted of it. Is it a first offense, second offense, or third or subsequent offense? And these offenses never go away. They're on your record forever. You can have had a driving while suspended 20 years ago and you have another one that's still your second offense. Ironically enough, with drunk driving, if your previous offense was more than 10 years ago and you have another one, it's still treated as a first offense. That previous one sort of goes away for sentencing purposes. So, for that reason alone, it's fairly serious, and I advise people and caution people not to plead guilty to driving while suspended if there's any other way around it, because that guilty plea, that finding, that conviction is never going to go away. It's always going to be on your record. So a first offense is a $500 fine. There is a presumption against incarceration, usually no jail time for that. And it can carry an additional suspension of your license of nothing to up to 180 days. In addition, there is a surcharge of $250 a year for 3 years for this, so it can be expensive. A second offense is a $750 fine, 0 to 5 days in jail, and oftentimes there will be a couple days in jail. There isn't a straight presumption against one, so there is that danger. And again, 0 to 180 days suspension. A third or subsequent offense, this is where it really gets serious, is a $1,000 fine. A minimum, 10 days in jail. Okay, it's a straight 10 days in jail. And up to 180 days, again, of an additional suspension should that come about. So this is why it's sort of built up over time, over a lifetime. And that third one can really harm you. Hi, Mike. How you doing? How are things where you are? Thanks for joining. Now, that's the penalty if you're driving while suspended. Now, if you are driving while suspended because of a drunk driving conviction, all right, then it becomes a lot more serious. It's an enhanced driving while suspended. So, if you were driving while suspended, it's your first offense, driving while suspended, on a first offense, drunk driving. Then it is, in addition to all those other penalties I talked about, an additional $500 fine, 10 to 90 days in jail, an additional 1 to 2 year suspension of your driving license. And that starts after your drunk driving suspension is over. They don't overlap, they're consecutive. Very serious. Now, if you are convicted a second time for driving while suspended on a first offense drunk driving suspension, or convicted for driving while suspended at all on a second or subsequent drunk driving suspension conviction, then it's actually considered a fourth-degree crime in New Jersey. What other states would call a felony. Very serious. Instead of 10 to 90 days in jail, 6 to 18 months in jail. Okay? So, very serious. Don't drive if you're suspended for drunk driving. So those are the penalties for driving while suspended, to give you an idea of how serious it is and why you need to take it seriously. Most people get ticketed for driving while suspended either because they're pulled over for some other reason. Maybe they're speeding or violated some other motor vehicle law, or the officer may have just scanned their license plate. Patrol cars now have the ability to scan your license plate. It'll come up on their onboard computer as to whether the owner of the vehicle has a suspended driver's license, the registered owner. That's considered good probable cause. They don't have to suspect you of doing anything else. The officer can just be bored and just decide to scan your plates, and it'll come up. So, another reason why you shouldn't take the risk to drive if you're on a suspended license. But that's how it often comes about. Either because you committed another offense, violated another law, a traffic violation, or they simply scanned your plate. Now, you might be under an active suspension. Now, if you were suspended and you went to court and you pled guilty or were found guilty at trial, and the judge says, I'm suspending your license, surrender it, and that suspension isn't over yet, then you knew you were suspended, you shouldn't have driven, and that's pretty much it. There really isn't much you can do. You're under that active suspension. The other way it can happen is it can be an administrative suspension. The Motor Vehicle Commission, New Jersey Motor Vehicle Commission, can suspend your license themselves. Doesn't happen in court. Just up in Trenton, they decide to do it. And they'll send you a notice. Now, the question becomes whether you got proper notice of that suspension. Notice is good if the notice was sent to the last known address that the Motor Vehicle Commission had for you. Okay, this is why it's important if you change your address, if you move, to have that updated with DMV. So if anything happens, any notices go out, they go out to the proper address. Because you could have moved away 2 years ago. But if motor vehicle sent it to your old address, because that's the last one they had, and it didn't come back, then it's considered you had notice of a suspension. So you have to be careful. But it could still be fixable depending upon why you were suspended. Okay. If you were suspended, as I said, for driving while suspended, I said there could be a 0 to 180 day suspension of your license. That can happen administratively if the judge in court doesn't suspend your license, but the Motor Vehicle Commission gets notice of your being found guilty of driving while suspended, and they decide to give you a 6-month suspension. That can happen administratively. Which is why oftentimes if I plead someone guilty to driving while suspended, I ask for like a 5-day suspension or something like that, so that motor vehicle sees that and it avoids them triggering it, because that can create a problem. So it could be, but if you're stopped and it was an administrative suspension, and maybe that suspension notice was sent out a few days ago and you haven't gotten your mail and you haven't seen it yet, you didn't know. well, then that's a proof that the state has to show that you knew that you had a suspended license and you drove anyway. That's an element of proof. Now, if you're in, as I said, if you're in court and the judge suspends your license and handed your license over to the clerk, there's no arguing that you didn't know. But if it's by mail because of an administrative suspension, there's at least that argument, and the state still has to prove that. They have to, the local prosecutor has to provide proof from Motor Vehicle Commission that a notice was sent to your last known address according to motor vehicle records, and enough time for you to know about it or be on notice that you were suspended. So oftentimes that you can get that fixed, or that might be an issue where you can get it pled down. So that's something to consider. Now, how do these administrative suspensions happen? Well, I mentioned one of them, but others are maybe you had a ticket in another court and you never showed up for court, and the judge, failure to appear. Ultimately, they suspend your license. That's a good way to get your attention, and your license was suspended. And again, it's a notice issue, but that's how it can get suspended. And then you get pulled over somewhere else and ticketed for driving while suspended because you didn't pay that fine in the other town, or you didn't appear in the other town. Now, as I said, another reason might be that you did appear, you pled guilty, and you didn't pay the fines, and to get your attention, they suspended your license. That's something called a detainer, a judicial detainer, and that's something that a judge in a municipal court can order, sent up to the Motor Vehicle Commission to and tell them to suspend your license. So that in those instances where you didn't appear, or you didn't pay the fines, it can result in a suspension of your license. And believe it or not, you better pay those parking tickets, because that can result in, ultimately, the parking authorities, they'll get your attention also by suspending your license. So obviously, the best way to do that, if you have that situation, so now we're assuming that you've been stopped in a town, ticketed for driving while suspended, and it's because of one of these judicial detainers. So you have some unfinished business in another court. Well, what I recommend you do is go to the Motor Vehicle Commission office nearest you. Get what I call the pink sheet. It's a sheet that, form they fill out, says, all right, I need to restore my license. What's standing in the way of my doing it? And they'll tell you, they'll give you a list of every reason why. There might be more than one detainer. You might have more than one problem. What you need to do, a checklist of what you need to do to get your license restored. So then you have to go through that checklist and take care of it. I've had clients retain me. I call it the tour of South Jersey. They'll come to me and they've got tickets that need to be resolved in 2 or 3 different towns, and they'll retain me for each one. I'll go in and clean it up, straighten it out, and either have them appear and dispose of the ticket, or get into a payment plan for the fines, and then the judge will then issue what's called a rescinding order. That rescinds the detainer on your license. Now, it's important. Sometimes the court will issue the rescinding order, and then the clerk will notify the Motor Vehicle Commission to remove the detainer. Sometimes they'll give you the rescinding order, and it's up to you to take it to DMV, Motor Vehicle Commission, and have that processed. If that happens, if the court gives you the rescinding order, then make sure that you get over to DMV right away and get it to them, and get it confirmed, and get a new pink sheet that says, okay, they took care of that, because they expire after time. I believe they expire after 30 days. So you want to make sure that you get that in. So, and do that with each place. Then once you get everything on that checklist done, everything on that pink sheet's checked off, and the Motor Vehicle Commission says, okay, good. All the obstacles that are standing in your way to having your license restored have been removed, then you pay them $100 and get your license restored. And then once you have that, you can go to the court that issued you your driving while suspended ticket and say, here's my license. Now, strictly speaking, even under those circumstances where you don't have an active suspension, you're just trying to straighten things out with the Motor Vehicle Commission or with other towns, you are, strictly speaking, still guilty of driving while suspended. most judges, and in my experience, in my practice here in Gloucester County, and I've appeared in Camden County and courts in Burlington County, Salem, Cumberland, the judges here understand that this is regulatory. They understand the seriousness of driving while suspended convictions, how they can mount up, how the penalties can continue to be severe, and they'll be understanding, and it'll give you the time to restore your license. They won't give you forever, all right, but they'll give you time to restore your license. And then once you're restored, you show proof of restoration to the prosecutor. Usually they'll either dismiss the charge or plead it down to failure to display a valid driver's license at the time you were stopped, which is a fine and court costs, and that's it. So nothing really serious about that. So now, another thing that can cause a problem with your license is motor vehicle surcharges. And they can mount up, and if you don't pay, they can accrue interest and everything else. Now, a lot of times people get in trouble as a result of drunk driving convictions. Now, let's say you had a first offense drunk driving, and you had a 7-month license suspension, or even as short as 3 months. But nevertheless, your suspension is over. You're no longer during active suspension, but drunk driving carries a surcharge of $1,000 a year for 3 years. It's expensive. If you don't pay it, then the Motor Vehicle Commission can ultimately suspend your license, and the longer it goes, the more interest it accrues, and that amount can build and build, and can sometimes become unaffordable. So if that happens, if you get stopped, you're driving while suspended for surcharges, you need to make nice with the Motor Vehicle Commission. You need to go to them and say, look, okay, I owe this money. What can I do? What kind of a payment arrangement can I enter into to get this detainer removed so I can restore my license and get into some sort of payment plan? And again, then go back to the court, work something out with the prosecutor. Now, depending upon how much you have in surcharges, that might be possible, might not be possible. A lot of times, they'll want a significant down payment than with monthly payments, and you might not be able to afford the down payment, and that can stand in the way. Sometimes I've had people come to me with $15,000, $20,000 in surcharges, believe it or not. They can really mount up and can really be a problem. So if you're able to come to terms, that's great. If you're not, you may have to file bankruptcy. It's obviously a last resort. Not something you should do unless you absolutely have to. But bankruptcy can wipe out motor vehicle surcharges here in New Jersey. So that can be your path to restoration. You file the bankruptcy, provide proof to the Motor Vehicle Commission of filing the bankruptcy. They'll usually then, upon the payment of a $100 restoration fee, you always got to pay that $100. But upon payment of restoration fee, they'll usually restore your license. And then, again, go to court and do that. This option can be a timing issue, whether the court that issued the driving while suspended ticket gives you enough time to get the money together, to go to an attorney, to prepare and file the bankruptcy, to get restored. That is an issue, but it's still an option for you depending upon what your timing is. So understand, the sooner you get to work on what you need to do to restore your license, obviously the better off you are. Now, sometimes, the simplest circumstance I found is you just forgot. You got to the end of your suspension, whether it was for drunk driving, failure to have insurance, a prior driving while suspended. No matter what the reason was for that suspension is now over. And a lot of people are of the misunderstanding that they think, well, once this suspension is over, my license is restored. I can drive now. Hey, the period's up. Now I can drive. No, that's not the case. No matter what, you still got to go to the Motor Vehicle Commission. You still got to pay the $100 to get your license restored. And if that's the case, simple enough. As I said, at least in my experience in the courts in my area, the prosecutors and judges are very reasonable. Get restored. Go to the Motor Vehicle Commission. Get restored. Then go to court. Show the prosecutor your valid driver's license, and usually they'll plead it down or dismiss it. So, as you can see, there are a lot of solutions available for a lot of people under a lot of circumstances that can avoid the tragedy of having to plead guilty to driving while suspended. I had someone that it was a notice thing. The first one, it was on notice, and she because she hadn't paid a fine in another town. And it was an issue. She didn't know it had been suspended. So there's notice, and it was also fixable because all she had to do was work out payments in that other town. But she didn't do that. She didn't address it. And she started mounting up other driving while suspended tickets. And she ultimately pled guilty to those two. And by the time she pled guilty to the original and the first one, she was then facing jail time for a third offense. So fortunately, I was able to unwrap that, get the original plea vacated, and then on the defense of lack of notice, got it pled down. So now she no longer has that third offense, but it can be an issue. So you don't want to let this sit. As soon as you find out about it, to get it taken care of. But that's it for this episode of Lunch with a Lawyer. Hopefully you've learned something useful. And if you like this video, I'd appreciate it if you could hit that like button. If you love this video, click that love button. If you really love it and you think other people could benefit from this knowledge, this information, click that share button. Share it on your timeline. This video it'll appear to everybody that has liked my Richardson Law Office's Facebook page, and any of my friends that are on my feed, personal feed, that are watching this can see it. But if you share it, then your friends can see it, and if they share it, their friends can see it. So you're spreading the knowledge by sharing the video. So I'd appreciate it if you would share it. Also, the likes and loves help the Facebook algorithm to get this out to more people because people find it engaging. This will also be available on my YouTube channel sometime next week. Usually taking me about a week to get it up there at richardsonlawoffices.tv. If you watch it there, be sure to give it a thumbs up if you like it, and to share it on your feed if you like that. Excuse me. And even better, subscribe to my YouTube channel if you want to get more videos like that. I have other video content besides these shows. So that's it for this month. Next month, it'll be same date. It'll be March, because we got 28 days in February. It'll be March 9th on a different topic. And I will see you then. Thanks for joining. See you this month.